Okay, I think we're ready to start then. All right, so hello everyone. I'm Alice Key. I'm Deputy Money and Business Editor at the I newspaper here in the UK. I'm your moderator today, and I'd like to welcome you all to our panel discussion on advancing gender equality in the workplace. I'm thrilled to be here today in honour of International Women's Day and to be part of this important conversation around how to accelerate progress on workplace gender equality. I'd like to quickly begin by thanking everyone for joining, particularly our 4 special guests, as well as Natura & Co and GlobeScan for putting the event together. It's been 5.5 years since the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals were launched, with a target to achieve them by 2030. SDG 5 focuses on achieving gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. Establishing gender equality in the workplace is a key aspect of making progress on this goal. So today we're going to be discussing current progress as well as where we need to go in order to see more change. So I'm delighted to welcome our expert panel of female leaders who are an ideal group to discuss this. I'm going to invite each of them to introduce themselves briefly in a moment, but just to go over who we have Sanda Ojiambo, who is CEO and Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. We have Angela Cretu, Avon CEO, who's responsible for Avon outside of Latin America and for oversight of Avon's brand globally. Charmian Love, co-founder of B-Lab UK. And last but not least, Alessandra Orofino, an activist, and she is co-founder and executive director of Nossas. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'll now ask each panelist to introduce themselves and explain what honouring International Women's Day means to them personally. So let's go in the order that I introduced you panelists. So Sanda, could you kick us off with what International Women's Day means to you?
Great, thank you so much, Alice, and really happy International Women's Day to all of you, all the men and women and young people who are watching and really celebrating this important day for women and for the world. We always say it's not just one day, it should be every day that we honor the fact that it really takes 2 genders to move world progress forward. So what does this day mean for me? The theme, Choose to Challenge, I think it's especially relevant because without challenging a lot of the orthodoxies and the biases that exist that have perpetuated systems of inequality and perhaps created differences between these 2 genders, we will not be able to progress. So it is a powerful expression of the fact that we do need to ask questions. We need to challenge systems, we need to challenge cultures, we need to challenge biases, because without those challenges, we continue to perpetuate these inequalities. And I'd just like to say, thank you to Natura for putting together this panel. I think it's very important and obviously very apt. We've made great strides towards achieving the global goals, the sustainable development goals that you mentioned at the very beginning, but a lot more needs to be done to truly achieve gender equality in many spheres, not just in the domestic sphere, in education, in health, and in economics, where it's been mentioned it'll take 257 years to bridge the gap between salaries and pay between men and women. So I think there's lots to be done, but we must proactively challenge all of the biases.
Happy Women's Day, everyone. I am really honored and thrilled to be representing Natura & Co. We are a collective of 4 purpose-led global brands that have always believed in doing business differently. While Avon, Natura, The Body Shop, Aesop all have distinct brand expressions and very diverse business models, what truly unites us is this belief that business can and should be a force for good. And last year, our group launched its commitment to life for 2030 sustainability, which includes all the ambitious targets and goals on climate, recircularity, regeneration, but a special focus on improving working life of women around the world, ensuring the living wage for all by 2023, and achieving equal gender access and representation at the senior roles. Now I'm representing today Natura & Co, but within the group, I'm the CEO of Avon. I've been in this company for 22 years, and I've been blessed to work in a more than just an inclusive, democratic beauty company, but being part of a movement that connects 5 million representatives around the world. And now please just imagine what's the power of influencing women's lives of this large network, both at Avon and Natura. And just by buying from an Avon representative or a Natura consultant, it has a ripple effect on their families and their communities. So we've created a business model that truly share earnings with our stakeholders. And we truly believe that we are a stakeholder value focused business contributing to a better world for women, understanding that this means a better world for all. And for me today, it's the time for us to once again celebrate the success of many women who have built for the last 2 years, the stronger voice for gender equality, but as well continue tackling the challenge that still exists for girls and women out there in ensuring freedom of choice and free access to learning and as well proper representation in leadership roles.
Okay, thank you. Charmian, you ready to jump in?
I'm gonna jump right in, and I gotta say, you used the word movement, Angela, and I find myself moving here, because what an amazing group of people to be celebrating this special day with. My name's Charmian Love. Everyone calls me Char, and I have the great privilege of being really connected into the Global B Corp movement as the co-chair of the Global Climate Task Force and the co-founder of B Lab UK. I also have the chance to spend a lot of time up working with young people, business students. So I have a role as an entrepreneur in residence up at the Side Business School at Oxford University. And when reflecting on this question about what this day means, I think what came to mind are a lot of the words that have been said. Like, this really is a moment to reflect and really get fired up about progress and the roads that we still need to travel. But for me, it's also an important moment just to really connect and celebrate some of the incredible women that are really pioneering and leading and showing what is possible. And I just want to acknowledge, those that are on this panel, but also a lot of the people who you can't see on the screen who have made today possible. So just, I think, celebration and just recognizing the spaces that are being created to really celebrate and recognize what leadership looks like on this very special day. Sanda, you also talked though about the need to remember how we engage men, and that actually, what we need to do is work together and create a shared commitment towards gender equality in the workplace. And I have to say, I'm the mother of 2 sons. I'm going to get a little personal because why not? And this is the time to do it. Usually Women's Day is quite special because I usually bring them to different Women's Day events that I attend so that they can be in the audience, they can be in the spaces. Today is a bit different because today actually was their first day going back to school here in the UK after many weeks of homeschooling. And what I wanted to share was that actually my husband took them this morning and dropped them off and did that sort of really important handover, having had this sort of period. So I wanted to share that because really my goal as their mom is to really make sure I'm raising them to be good partners and good husbands and good friends and good sons. And in our family, we have a few lines of poetry that actually have been passed down through the generations. And it's become a bit of a family mantra. And I wanted to share it today because some of the words in this little poem excerpt really signal to me what Women's Day is about. And the lines go, 2 things stand like stone: kindness in another's trouble and courage in your own. And so today, Women's Day to me is absolutely about celebrating. It's about the connections and it's about kindness and it's about courage.
Great. And Alessandra, are you back with us?
I am. Sorry about that. I'm here.
That's all right. Would you tell us what honouring International Women's Day means to you?
Of course. Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here in such amazing company. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Alessandra. I am an activist. I co-founded and run an organization in Brazil that works on a range of issues, including gender equality. And of our main projects on the subject is Mapa do Acolhimento, which connects survivors of gender-based violence with therapists and lawyers that provide them with pro bono services all over the country. This past year, we had a spike in demand for Mapa do Acolhimento, and we're now welcoming or helping an average of 1 woman every hour with our services. And for me, honoring International Women's Day is about solidarity and action, is about reaching out to other women and making sure that we're standing in solidarity with women around us, but also taking action because there's still so much to be done. And even the rights and access that we have, the previous generations really have fought for, they're sometimes more fragile than we're led to believe. So, so that's what this day reminds me of.
Okay, thank you everyone. We're now going to move on to the results of the registration questions. So for this event, we included a few poll questions to be filled out by everyone who was registering. And they were around how much progress has been made on SDG 5 and levels of optimism on achieving the goal by 2030. They're pretty stark results. So we heard from all of you through this poll that only 6% feel that there has been a great deal of progress on Sustainable Development Goal 5. So that means, yeah, the majority feel that there has only been some or little progress on the goal. And however, there does seem to be a good deal of optimism that we can achieve SDG 5 by 2030, with 55% of respondents indicating they are at least somewhat optimistic that we can make progress on the goal. So I'd like to get some reactions from the panel. I'm going to put the actual questions that were asked to two of the panelists, one each. So Sanda, could you give me your response to question 1, which was, how much progress do you think has been made over the past 5 years on Sustainable Development Goal 5, which, as a reminder for everyone, aims to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls?
Well, great. And I'm going to start on a positive note, because we can't deny that first, the SDGs were a great rallying call to governments, to the UN, to civil society, to the private sector, to really galvanize these goals for humanity. And I think even calling out gender, setting the targets and indicators, and setting the direction of travel, I think has been one really great, movement and direction to think about. And I think that's very important. And so a lot has been done in different areas around the world. More girls are able to go to school. Significant progress has been made on issues around harmful cultural practices, bride price, female genital mutilation in countries around the world. First of all, we have more companies interested in working around, gender issues now more than ever from the aspect of the Global Compact. More girls are enrolled in primary school than has ever been in any point in history. We see more women serving as members of parliament and business leaders. And of course, most recently speaking in the US, having the first female vice president in the country. So, there are pockets of progress, but the truth of the matter is we are still lagging far behind. And this plays out in issues around, pay parity. It plays around in issues such as gender-based violence. It plays around in issues that the fact that many of us, and congratulations to all the women leaders here, but I'm very sure our leadership journeys have been very lonely. I'm very sure that we've not always had the types of mentors and support systems that we would like to have in our respective organizations. But I think what is most optimistic for me is that the path is clear, the trajectory is clear, there's very high awareness amongst a broad range of stakeholders, and more importantly, men are walking this journey together. I really want to underscore that you cannot make progress on gender issues by solely focusing on what women need to do. It's very important to empower ourselves, but it needs to be a partnership to move things forward. COVID, of course, has undermined a lot of the progress that was made. Kudos to all the women who've demonstrated the multiplicity of roles that women play, from caregiver, homeschool teacher. Char, I guess it's your first day off now from having homeschooled your 2 boys, to all the roles that women have played. And I think if anything, this 1 year that we've spent at home has demonstrated, the wide range of skills that we bring to the table. And I think has allowed our male partners to also join in on what this thing called life is about from a gendered perspective. So progress, lots to do. I think at a personal level, this year has been a lot of learning and exposure around the multiple roles that women play around just really keeping homes, communities, and businesses running.
Thank you. And Charmian, I think you want to answer question 2 for us, which is, what is your level of optimism that we can achieve SDG 5 by 2030?
Thank you. And I'm really interested in the poll results, actually. That 55% number is really quite interesting. And it means to me, I think people are sort of, well, almost half of the people are feeling pessimistic and half are feeling optimistic. So there's something probably to really tuck into on that. In terms of the level of optimism that I'm kind of feeling, I believe it because I can feel the change that's happening. So I naturally am an optimistic person by nature. And part of what fuels that for me, I think, is when I speak to some of the young business leaders that are coming up through the system in MBA programs. Just this morning, I was talking to a whole bunch of them as they're thinking about, their careers and what leadership looks like. And I think it's really important because this is them trying to tackle with what kind of leader they want to be and how they want to show up in both which jobs they take and also the kinds of leadership they're going to express as they either start organizations or join them. So I have a level of hope because of what I'm seeing coming through with these extraordinary and exceptional business students. But I also want to back up because I think this idea of hope and optimism is worth unpacking a little bit too. And actually this 55% number is actually it's interesting when you think about it. One of my favorite words that I've come across in my journey is this word called heliotropy. And it's actually a term from botany that refers to the tendency of sunflowers to grow in the direction of the sun, right? So you can imagine these fields of sunflowers that as the sun crosses, they sort of follow the sun across the horizon. And the reason why I like this word so much is because I think we as humans are not that different than our cousins in the floral community. I actually think we will grow stronger and taller and faster when we are motivated by hope, by positivity, by opportunity, by light. Now, the important thing to remember about sunflowers, though, is that they are actually deeply rooted to the ground. So what we're not talking about in heliotropy is like being like a kite or a balloon that you let go of and it just sort of soars off and disappears, right? Actually, sunflowers are deeply rooted to the ground. And for me, the reflection of that is just being hyper aware of the challenges we're still facing, the urgency to act. What really got me this week is actually I was reviewing some of the stuff that came in from the World Bank last week. And the number that shocked me was that women today still have only 3/4 of the legal rights of men on average, and fewer than half of the world's countries have equal pay. So I am an optimist in nature, and I'm in that sort of 55% camp, but I actually really deeply understand the challenges that are being faced. So I think we need to apply a bit of a both and mindset to both be hopeful about what can be achieved and then really, really anchored and rooted into the realities so that we are working and building towards that brighter future.
Fantastic, thank you. All right, we're going to move into the main discussion now. The first question is for all 4 of you. So I think let's start with Alessandra and then Angela, but let me read out the question first. So it's, throughout the past year, we've seen a lot of examples of how COVID-19 has exacerbated existing inequalities. Do you feel the pandemic has had any implications on gender inequality in the workplace? And if so, what are the learnings from this? And what things can we do to course correct? Quite a meaty question, but can we try and keep it to a couple of minutes each, please? So let's start with Alessandra, if that's okay.
Of course. I think this question speaks to the earlier one around whether we're optimistic or pessimistic, right? And it's my personal take on this is that, of course, gender equality can be achieved. I am not as optimistic that it will. And one of the reasons is precisely because I really do believe that the next decade will be a decade of existential threats, of crisis, just like the one that we are currently living through, with climate change and other forms of crisis approaching or already unfolding. And our current track record at handling crisis is not very good when it comes to women and gender equality in general. Our governments failed us, and they failed women in particular when taking care of society during this crisis by not acting soon enough, by not providing enough relief to families. They've put women in the very tough position of having to essentially work double shift, as we've always done. But I think in this particular time, because of the additional pressures and challenges, that's become even harder. And I hope, and that's my optimistic side, I hope that we'll take the lessons from this pandemic and really do our homework so we can be more prepared for the next one. or the next crisis that comes into the horizon, because the data that we have now is very clear that yes, the pandemic has exacerbated gender inequality both at home and in the workplace. And the two things are linked together. Because there's gender inequality at home, there will be gender inequality in the workplace. Because women are bearing the brunt of the work at home, they can't really work. And because most countries are also going through a recession and there are high unemployment rates, of course, if you have to make a decision on who's going to stay home, assuming that maybe both adults in the households cannot even find jobs, then naturally falls to the person who's already doing most of the work. And it shouldn't be that way. So most women that I know, either wealthy or not so wealthy, from different racial backgrounds, different social backgrounds, very different lines of work, they are overwhelmed, especially women with children and young children. They are overwhelmed, they're overworked, they're stressed, and they're having to take care of sometimes extended families. We, I think, are learning just how important care is to our society. And that includes, of course, caring for the sick, caring for the people who are afraid, caring for the people who are mentally unstable at this time of fear and isolation, which of course exacerbates mental health issues. And that, of course, also includes caring for children. And unless we find collective solutions to particularly childcare, we're not going to see equality in the workplace. So that's how I started addressing it. It's an absolute outrage that most developed countries even, but that also includes developing countries, don't have any kind of universal childcare for babies and toddlers. And that we just take it for granted that it should be okay, that we can only send our kids to some sort of collective facility when they're turned 3 or 4 or 5, depending on the country. In the United States, it's 5. It's ridiculous. It's completely unsustainable. And it's made worse by situations like the pandemic.
Angela, what would you add to that?
Sanda is absolutely right. And crises have never been gentle to women. They had disproportionate impact on women. And now with this pandemic, we really see how our last 2 decades of work on gender equality have been wiped off. And it's sad to see, the challenge that women are going through. There are lots of statistics out there from the United Nations, the latest research, who is really calling out that there is this decades of lost fight for gender equality, that then with the recent study coming from High Speed Training calling out that 90% of women in the UK, as an example, are solely responsible for homeschooling, and 58% are juggling with the task alongside their job. Back exactly what Ale was saying. There are other studies who are saying that, like the one from BCG, saying that women with children would account for 65 hours per week of home chores alongside their job. So at Avon as well, we deployed our own study recently, part of our community cry for help, speaking about the isolation, speaking about the pressures. And 92% of women, and watch out, this is not coming from only some developing countries, it's from everywhere, from very developed to the emerging markets. And women, 92% of them have said that they had a heightened sense of pressure. And out of them, a large majority said that they have had an increased feeling of self-doubt. So imagine this is really a big impact, the self-confidence and the way they feel they have the ability to juggle with all, yes, with the homeschooling, with the financial stresses, with the job, the need to perform everywhere very well. And indeed, this is a challenge that requires everyone in our communities, from public sector to private sector, not to look at this gender equality as a solution coming someday. The sense of urgency calls it to be a standard now, to be part of our business KPIs, along with financial KPIs and our other sustainability KPIs, transparently called out to our community as our key role. And our businesses, back to what we were saying and you're sharing earlier, we have a crucial role to get to really support this value that we share our communities and offer women flexible ways to work. understanding their life pressures, to offer them a network of support to increase their self-confidence and understanding that they are not alone. And that can be done today. We don't have to plan for the next 30 years. It's just a matter of commitment. And at Natura & Co, we really have seen it as a positive realization and of an understanding the communities that we serve. And we have taken a series of decisions that are impacting both the life of women working in organizations, at ESOP, at the Body Shop, Avon, but as well with the communities we are serving at large.
Okay, thank you. Sanda, I think you already touched a little bit on COVID and the effects of it earlier, but is there anything else you'd like to add on this question?
You know, the only thing probably I'd add, and I think the ladies have done a fantastic job at unpacking the issues, is perhaps the impact of COVID from a business perspective. You know, around the world, women tend to lead and run and own small and micro businesses. And what we've seen is that this category of business has been most impacted by COVID. It's meant that women that ran, you know, small enterprises that also actually employed perhaps other women or other members of community have had to shut down. It's often the case that women lack access to capital. In many countries of the world, it's not simply that you can walk in and get a bank loan or get a credit card or, you know, get access to financing. So what does this mean? It means women's initial hard-earned savings and investments that were plowed into creating these businesses have first been lost. And secondly, they don't have the capacity to go back and apply for additional financing. So I think if you look at it from that perspective, in many instances, I mean, women have truly been severely affected from a business, you know, small and micro business perspective. And, you know, my hope is as we see trillions of dollars of economic stimulus funding being unleashed across the world, that there is a specific, you know, gendered mechanism that will really allow the re-emergence or the rebirth of the really important small and micro enterprise work that women were doing. A lot of this feeds into large, you know, value chains of large organizations. I think that large organizations do need to build resilience in their supply chains, because without that resilience, we really exacerbate the fragility of business and the fragility of the types of enterprises that women entrepreneurs own, run, or lead. That would be my one addition to the topic.
Thank you. And Charmian, anything else to say on this topic?
You know what, to be honest, absolutely nothing to add. I think we covered it all in those amazing questions. So I would just say, like, thumbs up, high five to all the comments that have just been made.
Perfect. Okay, let's move on now to a question which is for Sanda and Alessandra. So we're going to take a bit of a step back more broadly from COVID and discuss what the barriers actually are to gender equality in the workplace. So that's on 3 fronts. So that's, what do you think are the primary ethnic, economic, and cultural barriers preventing progress on gender equality in the workplace? Let's hop back to Alessandra.
That's a tough question. The main ethnic, cultural, and economic barriers. I'm assuming this is quite different depending on the country and the context. So I can give you a perspective from Brazil, which I think is relevant to this conversation. Brazil, as you all know, or maybe not actually, if you're Brazilian, you probably know, was the last country in the world to abolish slavery. So the main ethnic barrier to achieving gender equality at any level, but including the workplace, of course, is race, is the fact that this is still a very racist country. And Black women in particular, I think, are still perceived as slaves in many ways. We have the world's largest population of domestic workers, and they only got workers' rights very recently in 2012. Which means that we passed a constitution in '88, and for a full almost 30 years, we didn't give one particular class of people worker rights that everyone else had because they were domestic workers. And that the overwhelming majority of women who are in this situation are Black women in Brazil. So that's definitely a barrier. They now have worker rights, but that there are still, of course, barriers related to race that cut across and that are present in other kinds of workplace, not just in the specific case of domestic workers. When it comes to cultural and social barriers, again, I stress the overwhelming role that women play in childcare and how little we do to address that imbalance. I think that's a big barrier. And then, of course, there is a threat of violence, which keeps women out of certain jobs and functions in society. I work very closely with women who are victims or survivors of violence. And I know that this is a real issue. This is keeping women from applying to jobs that might require them to work night shifts or go into dangerous places or areas. And of course, a lot of women don't have a choice and they still do these things, but it's definitely harder. And that's something that I think is true to Brazil, but also to other contexts. It's interesting, I think, that we're having this conversation about inequality, gender inequality in the workplace, in the context of so many movements that are advocating for rights across all kinds of other issues, including racial equality, including access to a minimum living income during the pandemic as we go through crisis, because these things are linked. They really are. Without that minimum level of income, without credit to women business leaders, without addressing this incredible historical debt that we have towards Black women in particular, we're not going to get any closer to this goal. So this, again, I think some specificities to apply to Brazil, but some I think are relevant to other countries in the world as well.
Great, thank you. And Sanda, would you like to flag any other barriers that you think are important to note?
Sure, and I'll take a step back and go a little bit personal. I'm Kenyan, so I'm from Kenya, born and bred. I don't take it for granted that I am where I am. In many countries around the world, you know, investments in women's education is simply not made because sometimes girls are seen more valuable as being early brides. Investments in education are seen as more valuable or more worthwhile for young boys as opposed to young girls. So right from the start, I think that, you know, girls and women face incredible challenges around the world in simply just getting an education. And that's one of the first barriers. The second barrier is then choosing what to do in education. In many places around the world, a lot of trades, a lot of subjects are just not seen as the womanly thing to do. And that's why there's a dearth of women scientists, there's a dearth of women in technology. I mean, significant efforts have to be made to get women to take up these studies and do them without bias and feel comfortable in their trades and their professions as well. That's another bias. You know, it's not always evident that certain careers can be fully taken up, enjoyed by women. There's significant bias around that. The third bias, I think, that prevents women entering the workplace is simply the choice that women often have to make between a career and a family. And, you know, sometimes women are put in very difficult positions around what to do and what to choose. And some of these are actually unsaid and unseen barriers and biases, but I think only women may fully understand what that pressure feels like at that specific point in time. So, you know, there's a lot that is familial. It could be ethnic, it could be cultural, it could be, you know, economic decisions that lessen the opportunities that are available for women. And why I highlight this track in particular is that it really has to have a multi-sectoral approach. You know, when you talk gender, you need to talk health, you need to talk education, you need to talk economic empowerment, you need to talk about community mobilization, because it's not a single track you know, solution or single track approach that I think is going to help dismantle all these barriers and all these challenges. You walk into the corporate space, there exists another set of biases, you know, unconscious bias that perhaps prevents women from progressing as far as they should. You know, there's a lot of work that is being done by the UN around what we call the women's empowerment principles and really helping understand what one needs to do to support, you know, parity within the organizations. But I always go by this saying, you know, you cannot become what you have not seen. So back to my earlier comment, we have to continue to challenge these orthodoxies so that we're able to lift up the next generation of women and provide the opportunities that we all have here to enable that next generation.
Great, thank you very much. In the interest of time, we're going to move straight on to talking about the role of business in all of this. So can I start with Charmian, please? And can you answer me, what do you see as the role of business in tackling gender inequality in the workplace?
Absolutely. I mean, I can't but help just reflect briefly, because actually this "you can't be what you can't see" just it resonates so deeply. So Sanda, I just want to acknowledge that and how important that is, that we need to be celebrating and making it visible, all the roles of leadership that are out there, in order for us to be able to open up this leadership space even wider. So thank you. And I will answer the question that you asked here. So the role of business. So I actually think that business is actually one of the most powerful forces we have ever created. And what we need to do is harness business in order to solve problems rather than to create it. And I do believe actually that it is an incredible opportunity that businesses have, because I see it every day with the B Corp movement. So we see amazing stories of B Corps giving evidence of that, where and how an inclusive and regenerative economy actually is possible, from their everyday interactions with their customers, with their workers, with their wider stakeholders, and how they take into consideration the longer term environmental climate emergency that we know we're facing. So I think for me, it's recognizing that business does have a role, and that there are signals of businesses that are doing this that we can learn from. Great thing is the B Corp community is all about celebrating and sharing these practices. Collective action and building community is a really important part of what it means to be a B Corp and engaged in the community. Just today, I've learned of some extraordinary stuff that our B Corps are doing. There's a company here called DIE that's trying to celebrate trailblazers of everyday women and what they can accomplish. This incredible campaign. And it's like, what have you gone through this year? Let's celebrate the range of accomplishments that women have had all over the place when it comes to what this last year has made people really sort of acknowledge of some of the stress, but also the trailblazing that's occurred. There was also a great article that we have in our little Medium blog at B-Lab UK, where a woman who runs this company called Yo-Yo Design, she talked about some of the questions that she's now asking when it comes to hiring people, such as, what hours do you want to work so that we can get the best out of you at work, and the right balance with your other life commitments. So I love seeing this kind of energy and this kind of innovation and this kind of sharing of practice. Now, that last one is interesting to me, because this word balance is one that, if I may just for a moment reflect on, because I know we use that term balance a lot. I was once asked on a panel how I feel about trading off my kids for my work. And I can tell you all, I kind of went like mama bear on it, because I was like, I don't trade my kids off for anything. And it made me really reflect on what we mean when we talk about balance. And I think, sometimes we think about balance as like weighing one thing off the other and like trying to think about the trade-offs. And I don't trade my kids off for anything. So I found comfort in kind of leaning into the idea of blending, and this idea of like bringing my whole self to work and blending who I am with my family, with my work, and equally bringing my work and engaging my family around it. So it's just sort of a slightly more holistic way to approach this question. Now, I think businesses themselves can be a place where those sorts of flexible working, that sort of structure can emerge. And actually, for me, I think, a working mom friend of mine in our local area, we started calling this idea of like a cocktail career, because it's about blending, again, all those things that are important to us, rather than feeling like we have to constantly weigh one off the other. Now, I realize that doesn't work for everybody, and everyone's got to find their own path. But I think this recognition of really, in business, we can find these ways to blend and recognize the power of both and. And I think that's going to be a really important thing for business leaders going forward. I also just want to acknowledge, Alessandra, your title and what you do. I've been just so inspired by learning more about the work of activists and the activist work that's happening. And one of the things I think is really important is for all businesses to really recognize the role that they have as business activists, and businesses needed to really intentionally activate for change. And I think there's a lot that we need to be learning from various organizations and social movements. So those are just a few ideas on where and how businesses can engage on this.
Okay, Thank you so much. And Angela, you're obviously also very well placed to comment on this. So can you tell us what you think?
Yes, especially because I'm now part of this phenomenon that is led by Natura & Co, where all the board meetings start with purpose and our sustainability goals before we even talk about profit. And it shows the commitment of a group for the purpose and belief they share together. But I would start at what businesses can do. First of all, share and make sure they speak out, that they have a voice in the community. This is not about the product and transaction, it's about our meaningful role in the communities that we serve. And the voice shouldn't come just from few of us, the leaders of these companies. It's good to happen, and I encourage every business leader to own, this role that we have in our communities. But it's about encouraging every member of our team, no matter the level in the organization, to influence their own micro community, to strengthen their own self-confidence, to strengthen their own voice. I think only then we get the movement. Otherwise, it's like we're broadcasting few opinion leaders' opinion, or that people might choose to listen or not. It's only relevant, relatable stories that are changing people's lives from somebody who looks or has a life that is similar to theirs. So I say speaking out of equality in all forms is key. Second, it's very important is that we own, as I said earlier, the way we transform our workplace to accommodate, for these different lifestyles and engage professional value in a flexible way. No more than 9 to 5, rigid place of work. I mean, we can find a way to blend in, how Shar beautifully said. It's not about a rigid balance. At the end, it's about the value we co-create. It's not about, ticking in or checking out. With a very rigid standard of how the value has been created. And in Natura & Co, we are really making lots of progress in this area. We also took, with full transparency to our own people, we took the pledge to close, if identified, any kind of gender pay gap. And this is very important. You would see few governments around the world calling it out. However, many of the governments are bluntly looking for a KPIs that doesn't take into account the mix of workforce. So for companies who have a larger male participation at the junior roles, like in supply chain, they would look like they have the right balance and no gender pay gap. I think there is a role for us and for our businesses and our governments to really come together and measure, literally in full transparency, for equal roles, equal pay, no matter the level in the organization, no matter the geography, no matter the culture. And that can happen. And in Natura & Co, we took an extensive exercise of data mining around the world. Imagine we have 37,000 employees, literally almost on the entire globe. And we will be communicating the results in a few weeks from now on. But I would tell you, I've seen the raw data. I'm extremely excited that we are an equitable organization, and we have not only an almost equal representation at senior roles and in a workforce, but we are also ensuring equitable pay for the similar roles. So more to come in this area, but I think there are so many things that a company and a business can do to truly walk the talk.
Okay, fantastic. In the interest of time, I'd like to ask just the next question just to Sanda, if that's okay, because I think, Angela, you've already kind of touched on this. So it's about the women in decision-making and leadership roles. Sanda, what opportunities are there to help drive more female leadership in the workplace? And is it an important element of gender equality?
Well, it certainly is, because I also firmly believe that inclusive decisions result in inclusive outcomes. So you need to have, both genders at the table to make outcomes that are going to make business sense, that are going to make community sense, that are going to make family sense. And I just think that inclusivity is very important. But what needs to be done, there needs to be that enabling environment for that to happen. And as I said, I think it's great that the businesses are paying attention to what happens in their business, but we need to expand this, because what we need to be able to do is understand and appreciate that we need an education system that is going to allow girls and women to flourish right from the start. So, you know, we need to be able to look at all of the backward linkages and see how we can support the systemic changes that are needed to be able to drive that forward. So first, for me, it needs to be a system-wide approach. I said earlier, it needs to be a multi-sectoral approach to be able to have more women engaging in all areas of professions to be able to rise to that leadership level. But once you're there, what do you need? You need a support system. And that support system needs to come from both genders. I think that women, though, we also do need to play more of a role in terms of business mentorship. And as I say, lifting up the next generation, I think is very important. And then businesses need to tackle some serious issues. They're soft, often called soft or unheard of issues. We need to constantly acknowledge that the workplace does not look the same for both genders. We need to acknowledge that sexual harassment in the workplace is real. We need to acknowledge that you need women-friendly workplaces. We need to acknowledge that women need not make any of the trade-offs that Shah was saying they're being asked to make. And, you know, I think so we need to take a 360 look at what it means to really support women within the workplace, because there are some fundamental unseen barriers and biases that we must address.
Thank you. And we are rapidly running out of time. I can't believe it. There's so much more to say, but let's go with this as our final question. And if you could just keep it to 1 minute, if that's okay. Each of you should answer this one. What do you feel needs to happen before a woman reaches the workplace in order to set them up for success in their career? Charmian, could you take that one first?
Sure, and I will be really brief because I could just reflect on some of the extraordinary stories and inspiration that we've heard today. I think what society really can do is it's really about providing courage and confidence. It's empowering women to step forward. I think it is about telling the stories from the past and the present in order for us to be able to set the right intention for where we need to go next. And I think it's about education. I mean, Sanda, I feel like I'm really channeling a lot of the comments you've been making. I'd personally like to see a lot more books that are being brought into the schools. I have a little prop because this is what we're going to be reading tonight. We actually read it quite often, but it's a book about 100 women who made history. So we need to have these tools. We need to have ways to have these conversations. And I think starting with young people is super important.
Alessandra, could you go next?
I think we need to prepare the men before the women reach the workplace. They need to be ready. They can be predators. They can behave the way they've been behaving for the past, well, I don't know, 1,000 years. But in particular, the past, let's say 50 to 50 years, as women have entered the workplace in more massive numbers. I think men's behavior needs to change dramatically. And that's the single most important thing we can do to help women as they enter the workplace.
Thank you. Sanda, what do you think needs to happen before women enter the workplace?
I'll be extremely brief, and I'm going to reflect on a saying from Dr. Seuss, the kid book author. A person is a person, no matter how small. And I think that if we embrace that saying, and if we allow our kids to embrace it, it will change a lot. A person is a person, no matter how small.
Very, very brief, very brief.
That we have these positive role models, yes, and we build that confidence, and as well helping women not to oppose men. We are not on the other side of the table. We are together in a diverse, yes, reaching perspectives, partnership. So may we with both, you know, support and help and encouraging one another, a woman another, a man a woman, and a woman a man, we can you know, create better value for humanity.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for answering everything so succinctly. It's such a complex issue, and I know it's so hard to distill everything down. But I think that we've raised some really interesting points there, and obviously there's going to be a fantastic chance to discuss that after this part of the event. So yeah, I mean, we've nearly reached the end of our time. So we're going to move to an interactive part of the event after this. Forum participants who have been watching this broadcast, you'll now get the opportunity to take part in a 30-minute text-based discussion moderated by Caroline Holm, who's Senior Director at GlobeScan. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our special guests, Angela, Charmian, Sanda, and Alessandra, Thank you all so much for your participation today and for sharing your insights on this important topic of empowering women in the workplace. I also want to thank Natura & Co and GlobeScan again for putting together this event.